Welcome everybody to our webinar today covering all things isocyanates. I'm Mary Cameron, I'm your regional coordinator, and we have quite a lot to cover today, so I won't take up too much time. We have not one, not two, but a few expert speakers. We got very lucky for this one, and we're going to be covering all sorts. With the recent updates to the group authority license, with the key new requirements, the annual auditing procedure, the changes to the SOP. We're also going to be covering the HCC's research, looking at the issues of MDHS 25/4, the possible resolutions and alternatives, and the progress made evaluating what could be proposed for future measurements, as well as recent advances in biological monitoring techniques. So Chris Keene, our president-elect for BOHS, is going to kick us off. Just before we start with Chris, though, if you guys wanted to submit a question, there is a chat box. If you see on your bar at the bottom there, that little bubble, you go into the chat box, you can submit your questions. We're going to do Q&As individually after each presentation. Normally, we would hold them all to the end, but because these three presentations, Chris, Graham, and Paul's, are a subject of their own. They're all kind of, related, but it makes sense to have individual Q&As. So if you submit your question, I'll keep track of them, and then I'll bring those up when each presentation is done. If I can remind you guys to have your cameras and audios turned off whilst the speakers are on, it just helps with the bandwidth and just focus on the presenter. So without further ado, I'll crack on over to Chris. Just to give just a 1 minute background of Chris. She's a chartered occupational hygienist with over 30 years of experience in assessing hazardous substance exposure and risk control strategies. She has extensive experience of providing occupational hygiene support for HSC and commercial clients, and has led several large-scale multidisciplinary research projects. Chris has worked across a broad range of industries, from the major hazardous sectors to manufacturing, construction, and agriculture. And she's been a board member for 2 years and is currently our president-elect of the society. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Mary. Good morning, everyone. Can people see me? Can people hear me? I'll assume that someone will jump in and tell me if that's not the case, because, okay. Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. I am president-elect of BOHS, so this is not a situation I ever thought I'd find myself in, leading a webinar in this capacity. It's quite a daunting prospect for me. For those that don't know, traditionally the president-elect does a tour of the regions in their president-elect year and discusses a presidential theme that they have selected, something they want to focus on in their presidency year. So this is the start of my tour of the regions. So you people are the guinea pigs. I've not given this presentation before. Obviously, I've been through it, but so yeah. Good morning and thanks for coming. I'm going to fill about 3/4 of an hour, hopefully, and that's going to be split. Really, my presentation split into 3 quite distinct areas. The first one is my theme for my presidency of BOHS, which is looking at how we can broaden the reach of our profession, how we can get to people that previously aren't aware of what occupational hygiene is, and people that need our help that currently aren't able to access our services. So that's going to be my first bit. I'm going to pause after that, and hopefully we can have a little bit of interactive discussion. I don't know how well that will work on Teams, and if it looks like it's not working, then I'll move on to deliver the rest of the presentation, because I'm then going to move on to talk about sustainable workplace health. This is a concept that we've been developing within the board of BOHS. It's getting people to look at occupational hygiene in a different way, and hopefully it's going to allow us to communicate with external stakeholders at a high level, and to be able to explain the value that occupational hygiene should be adding to the health and safety system and to protecting worker health across the piece. And finally, I'm just going to have a little ramble about volunteering for BOHS at the end, and hopefully galvanise 1 or 2 people in the audience to think maybe that whether they could actually volunteer for the society. So here we go. So yes, and I will keep referring to my notes, but I do have a tendency to go off message, so forgive me if I keep pausing to just reset myself. Broadening the reach of occupational hygiene. This will be my theme as president. I want us to look at opening out access to occupational hygiene, as I've said, to people, to groups of workers, to audiences that previously aren't really aware of what we do and have not been able to access our services. I'm building here on Alison Margaret is the current president. I'm sure you all know. Alison Margaret's theme for her year as president is collaboration. As a society, we have got literally hundreds, if not thousands, of collaborations running with various different groups all around the world. And Alison's done a fantastic job of capturing all those collaborations in a mind map so we can actually see the totality of those. Clearly, some of those collaborations are potentially more valuable to the society than others, and they're the ones where we want to focus our efforts. And Alison's doing great work to focus the efforts on the collaborations that will bring us the greatest returns in terms of protecting worker health. So I am building on what Alison's done. My presentation, my theme is about collaborating. It's about collaborating with different audiences that we so far haven't been able to reach. So who am I talking about? Sorry. Clearly, my theme and everything that we do as a society, everything we discuss at board level and everything that head office do is linked to delivering our current strategy. I'm sure as BOHS members, you're all aware that we launched a new strategy earlier this year. There were a series of webinars, one in each of the home nations, to discuss the strategy, to describe the strategy. I guess some of you will be very familiar with it and some less so. If you go and have a look at it, and it's on the website, it's on the BOHS website, there won't be anything in that strategy that comes as a surprise to any member. You know, we are aiming to do the kind of things that you will all be familiar with as BOHS as a society. The main aims of the strategy, as you can see on the slide there, I'm not going to read them out to you, but basically, we are trying to improve worker health. We are the voice for worker health protection, and everything we do in our strategy is geared towards us achieving that aim, these aims. Okay. My particular theme, this broadening the reach of occupational hygiene. I mean, I selected the theme and then I went back to the strategy to try and see how it linked in. I didn't go from the strategy, but it does link very clearly into the strategy. I've picked out a couple of elements from the strategy. You can see them on the slides. What I'm aiming to do with my theme is to further public understanding of what we do, who we are, what we do as a profession, and to promote equality of access to scientific knowledge, to get us into places that need our help and possibly don't even realise that there is a thing called occupational hygiene that can help to protect them and to protect their health. So this is the problem as I see it. The face of the working economy has changed dramatically in the last 20 to 30 years. Since that, certainly, you know, since I started work a long time ago, working for HSE. Back then, most people were employed in large companies. A lot of people were employed in large companies. Most people were employed on permanent contracts. A lot of people expected that they'd got a job for life. Large employers, generally with the resources to invest in protecting their workforce. They didn't always invest those resources particularly well, but generally the situation was that there were large employers. We're now in a situation, you will all be familiar with this because it's all over the media all the time, and it's been very large in the media through the pandemic. We've got almost 1 million agency workers in the country at the moment. 3/4 of the British workforce don't work in unionised workplaces. 3/4 of our workforce are not trade union members, and obviously trade unions have historically been great champions of protecting workers' health and safety. 3/4 of the workforce are not under the umbrella of a trade union. We've got 6 million SMEs in the country, and 90% of them are micro businesses, less than 10 employees. Can these micro businesses afford to take on an occupational hygiene consultant? I doubt that that's usually the case. So we've got a large groups of people here that are, there's a challenge for us in reaching them with our messages, and there's a challenge for us in giving them our help as occupational hygienists. Tried to do something right. Here we go. You'll all recognise these terms that are up on this slide here. They all mean slightly different things. If you look at the dictionary definitions, and then every person's got their own different interpretation of what these terms actually mean. But you'll all be familiar with these because, again, we see them in the media all the time. These are groups of workers that are on the fringes of the sort of employment sector, and there are a lot of them. And it's become very evident. I mean, it was evident, I think, to us as hygienists before, but it's become very evident through the pandemic that these workers often are struggling to receive adequate levels of protection when it comes to protecting their health from the exposures that they face at work. Agency workers, those people in the gig economy, subcontractors, you know, we've all seen the media stories about them. Generally speaking, the general employment conditions for people in these groups are not as good as those for those people working permanently for larger employers, and that ranges from everything from paid sick leave, holiday entitlement, pension rights, blah blah, right across the piece. But that same goes for health and safety protections too. They don't generally receive the same level of health and safety protections as other workers. I've asked the question there. I mean, it's a rhetorical question. I don't believe these people are getting a fair deal in terms of health and safety protections, and I want to look in my year as president as how we can start to address that. I don't pretend that BOHS can solve this problem overnight, and BOHS can't solve this problem on their own. We can't do that, but at least if we shine a light on it, we can make a start in terms of taking some positive steps. Why do I think this is a problem? I mean, I've been a practicing hygienist for a long time. I've been into a lot of workplaces, as Mary said, across the board. You're working for HSE, I've got to see the whole breadth of industry, from high hazard chemical industries right through to agriculture and waste and recycling and construction. You know, you see a whole spectrum of cultures and attitudes towards managing workplace health and safety, and particularly workplace health. I'm going to illustrate this with a real life example, and I could have given you any one of a dozen. This is something that a situation that happened to me a few years ago, and it kind of really did change the way that I thought about you know, how these groups of people are protected. So we were conducting a hygiene survey in a large industrial facility. I won't even tell you what industry sector it was in. It doesn't matter. And they were operating, for want of a better term, a dirty process. I don't like that, but I couldn't find a better term to describe it. There was a lot of contamination in this workplace, and there's no doubt that their controls, their exposure controls, could and should have been better than they were. But even with the best controls in the world, there would have been a lot of contamination coming from this process. And I said to the health and safety manager for the site, I commented on the level of contamination and asked them how they cleaned the plant. Because if they'd continued to contaminate it at that rate, I would have said that within a week or two, they wouldn't have been able to get through the front door of the workshop. It would have just been so heavily contaminated. And I was told that they had a team come in every night, overnight, a team of agency staff, and they cleaned the plant and returned it back to a reasonable state for the production teams coming in at 6 o'clock in the morning. I asked him, the health and safety person, how they did that, and they didn't have a clue. The agency staff turned up at night with magic brooms and cleaned the plant somehow, and there was no risk assessment for the cleaning activities, and the company themselves had no real knowledge as to what was going on these night shifts when these agency staff were cleaning the plant. Obviously, I was very, very interested in that situation, to the extent where I said, well, can we come back on a night shift and can we have a look at what's going on in terms of the cleaning? And the company were good enough to allow us to. This was a research visit. I wasn't there on an enforcement job. This was research. So this company had got us on site voluntarily, and they were good enough to let us come back and observe the cleaning operations that went on the night shift. And you won't be surprised to know that the exposure controls were very, very questionable indeed in terms of what these people were doing at night to clean this plant. The point is, I think, that they were totally off the radar of the company. They were working on the company's site, on the company's premises. They were working under the direction of the company. They'd been given a brief, clean the plant, return it back to a usable state by the morning. But the way they did that and the way that they were protected was off the company's radar. And there are so many examples, I think, where businesses have got blind spots like this. It doesn't only apply to industrial, it applies to all kinds of premises. You think about the office blocks we're working, we have cleaners coming in there at night. I'm not saying that this is always the case, because, you know, probably most of the time these cleaners are working for a fairly large facilities management company and are fairly well protected. But there's all manner of groups of people that are doing this kind of activity that may be off the radar. Clearly, we've recognised this in BOHS for years and years and years, and we've done a lot of work to reach out to industries and to groups of workers where we feel that our help is needed and where we feel that we can do some good. I hope you'll all be familiar with the Breathe Freely campaign, the Breathe Freely in Construction campaign, which I think was launched 7 years ago now. Brilliant piece of work, fantastic initiative from BOHS, the first real concerted campaign to get out there and communicate with industry. And we chose an industry that really needed occupational hygiene to help it. We chose construction. A lot of workplace illness in construction, a lot of respiratory disease as a result of dust exposures. So we chose respiratory disease, hence Breathe Freely. We weren't looking at all construction health risks, we chose a particular disease. But the point is, we conducted a concerted communications campaign to get into the construction industry and to provide them with support and to explain to them how they should be going about managing these health risks and cutting this huge burden of respiratory disease associated with their industry. And it was a roaring success. You go into construction projects now, people know who we are. 7 or 8 years ago, you ask people in that industry, what does an occupational hygienist do? And you got all the usual kind of answers that we're all familiar with, something to do with cleaning up or something like that. Certainly at the top end of the construction industry, they very clearly now understand what we do. They very clearly understand the contribution that we can make to helping them to manage their health risks. And at that top end of the industry, there are hygienists studded all over construction. The big construction projects, the Tideway Tunnel, the Hinkley Point Nuclear Power Station, HS2, they've all got occupational hygienists working at a senior level, taking risk management decisions within those projects. And that's what we need to drive towards. But there's a whole raft of contractors beneath them in construction where we're still yet to penetrate the market. People might be familiar with this piece of guidance on the right-hand side of my slide there. It's some guidance that we produced jointly with the TUC probably 2 or 3 years ago. Just another attempt for us to reach out and to explain to people who otherwise might not come into contact with occupational hygienists what it is we do and what it is that they can expect from us if they allow us to help them to manage the health risks within their business, within their industry sector, whatever level you want to think about. And then just last month, I don't know if members caught this or not, but HSE put out a call for consultation on amendments to the PPE regulations. There was a loophole in the PPE regs. Workers in the gig economy weren't receiving the same level of protection under the PPE regs as full-time employed workers, full-time employees. They were expected, or there was no legal responsibility to provide them with PPE. A lot of the gig economy is things like sort of taxi drivers, Uber drivers and things like that. They're the classic worker groups that are pulled out when we talk about the gig economy. And you might say, well, why do they need PPE? Well, maybe until 18 months ago, they didn't need a lot of PPE. We then had a pandemic and it became a very significant factor in protecting the health of this group of workers. And under the PPE regs, there was a loophole that meant that they had to provide their own PPE. So HSE are closing that loophole, and BOHS did make a response to the consultation, and obviously we emphatically support closing that loophole. But there's got to be more that we can do, and that's what I want to try and address in my year as president. I don't know what else is out there. I don't know what networks exist that can give us an access into some of these audiences we're already communicating with the Independent Workers Union of Great Britain, which I didn't even know was a thing until 6 months ago, but there is an Independent Workers Union of Great Britain. Clearly, that is a marvellous opportunity for us to engage with these fragmented audiences, with agency workers, casual workers. But there have to be other groups out there that aren't on our radar at the moment. And I guess that within our membership, there is knowledge that can point us towards these other groups. So really, I'm asking you as members to point the way and to give us some idea as to where we can go to access these audiences. And finally, a plea to you as practicing hygiene is that when you're out there in workplaces, in clients' workplaces, conducting exposure assessments and conducting risk assessments, don't forget about these worker groups. If you've got groups of workers coming in on the night shift to clean the plant or whatever it is, they're every bit as important as the production staff that are there, you know, on the day shift. And it's on you as health professionals to ask the questions, you know, how are these people being protected when you know, off the clock, if they're on the edge of the company's radar. I'm going to pause at that point because that's everything I want to say about this first topic. As I say, I wanted to try and open up a bit of discussion. I don't know if that'll work. I mean, has anyone got any comments, questions? Does anyone want to come in at this point?
I haven't seen any questions come through just yet, but if anybody wants to just pop a question into the chat box, please do. I'll pick up on it. I'm finding this so interesting. Can I jump in and ask a question and start a discussion?
Please.
Okay. Could you go back to one of your first slides where you're talking about the percent of industry that's made up of SMEs? And then there was a smaller percent of that where it was less than, there it is. Yes. Okay. So let's see. 6 million SMEs in the UK. Oh my goodness. And do you have do you know like how that works out as a percentage? Like how many SMEs are compared to the whole, you know, in the whole industry in the UK?
Well, yeah, I don't know how that works out. I mean, it would be fair to say the overwhelming majority, probably 99.5% of businesses will be SMEs, just based on that number.
Wow.
That doesn't mean that most people work in SMEs because they have smaller numbers of workers. So you only need a few big companies. The NHS, they're not an SME. They've got 1.3 million employees. So, you know, that's not to say that 99% of workers are employed in SMEs, but probably 99% of businesses fall into that category.
Yeah. And then even less, you know, less than 10 employees out of this chunk of 6 million. That's just amazing. It sounds just like very interesting because I've not really sat down and really thought of it as a percent before. But I mean, there's in our audience right now, there's a lot of occupational hygienists. Just have a think to yourself, how many times have you gone to a client and it was a big name car manufacturer, a big name construction, you know, company, and then how many sites have you gone to where it was less than 10 employees? I can think of quite a few times I've gone to site and it's been less than 10 employees, just some guys welding away in a corner in, you know, some warehouse or something. But a lot of it were these big name companies because they can afford the likes of us. So I really appreciate your theme being this because it's just highlighted how important it is that we get our grips onto these smaller companies.
We can't afford to engage consultants, Mary. We know that. So we need to give them information. We need to give them information.
Exactly. Yep. I'm seeing some come in. So let's see. To come across another. Oh, yes. Okay. So seafarers, I've yet to come across another hygienist working directly in the merchant navy. Indeed, it does seem like, I mean, I, for one, have never done any hygiene work in a Navy setting. I suppose they keep it more internal, but that's a good point, though, Leah. Yeah, how many hygiene settings are there? And there's just not enough trained occupational hygienists to actually do that work for that setting. So it's definitely a problem in that industry as well.
I don't know if that person wants to contact me offline because we've been looking at shipping as a possible area where this is my other hat on now, my HSE hat on, as a possible area where there might be the opportunity to do some work. Yeah, there's a whole industry out there on the high seas that we know very little about. And there will be health risks out there. I don't know what they are, but they are there, and we don't really know. My guess is that they'll be doing it. The industry will be doing a very good job on safety, because most industries do, especially high hazard industries, and possibly will be a little bit less mature in terms of their health risk management culture. But whoever's asked that question, I mean, my email address will come up at the end. If they want to get in touch offline, I'd love to have a conversation with you.
Very good point. Huh? Are the BOHS leaflets freely available for distribution?
Which leaflets? Are we talking about the web guidance that I put up?
Oh, yes. Yes, that's it.
They're freely available insofar as they're on the internet. So anyone that's got access to the internet, which is most people in the developed world, can access them freely. I don't think we issue them as printed versions. You can't order 50 copies from head office, but they're there on the internet. And if you've got a printer, you can print off your own versions, as many as you would like to do. And we would encourage you to do so.
There you go. Thank you, Adrian. So here's a link for to the website where you can do your downloads.
Thank you. Thank you.
Another question. So regarding the availability of PPE to all, will this include subcontractors at a business premises?
It should. I mean, I don't pretend to understand the complex employment law around subcontractors. It's not something that I would claim to be an expert in, but forget about the law. The principle is they should be protected. They should receive the same level of protection as everyone else. And you know, that's what I want to explore within this theme. Yeah, I don't know what the law is in terms of who should be providing them with PPE. They certainly shouldn't be paying for their own. They do fall under the Health and Safety at Work Act, and it's not legal to charge an employee for PPE. But you know, the point is that they should receive the same level of protection as everyone else. And actually, as with everyone else, we shouldn't be relying on PPE to protect them, because we have a hierarchy of control that we should be trying to implement before we reach for the dust masks.
All right, good. From Rob, so has the Breathe Freely campaign stalled? I'm keen to get it going amongst our supply chain. I think it's being revamped, isn't it?
The Breathe Freely campaign has been reviewed and revised. There was a blip last year when we had a global pandemic, and BOHS's attention shifted, not unreasonably, to providing some fantastic guidance on controlling the COVID risk. Breathe Freely is now mobilising again in the background. There's been a lot of work at BOHS head office to revamp and revise the website. We had to revise the website, and that's taken a lot of effort, but we are hoping that the campaign will start up again with some more outward facing activities within the next 2 or 3 months.
Excellent. Great. All right. Some other comment. Thank you for the link, Alexis. Great. So maybe I'll give it just another minute if anybody else wants to pop any questions to Chris. Take this opportunity. Otherwise, we'll go straight into Graham and then Paul and get all.
I've got another bit to do yet, Mary. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize.
Okay.
Are we okay? Is everybody okay there? Then so slides and first statistics. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Let's carry on with your other bit then, Chris. Sorry about that.
So confused. I just want to. I'll go quickly. I've got an echo. Can someone mute? I think it might, Mary, it might be you. Can you mute yourself? Right. Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. So yes, very quickly, I'll cover the next couple of sections of my presentation. Sustainable workplace health. We are conscious at BOHS board level that we need to raise the profile of hygiene and not just make people more aware of the fact that occupational hygiene is a thing, but to raise people's perception of what our profession does. I think historically, we may have been perceived in some quarters as measurement technicians, the people that go out there and collect the intelligence, collect information from the workplace, and then hand that information over to the grown-ups, if you like, to make important decisions on that information. And And that's not right. You know, we need to position ourselves higher up that sort of pecking order, because we're every bit as capable of making high-level strategy decisions about managing health risks as other groups are too. So we've developed this concept, sustainable workplace health, to give it a name and to get a shared understanding within BOHS of the kind of messages that we would like to be promoting out there in the wider world. Okay. You'll have seen the 3 balls before that I've got on my slide. Occupational health management is all about a combination of these 3 factors: managing well-being, managing the health of workers, that's the clinical side of occupational health, and protecting people from workplace health risks. And that's what our profession do. That's where the hygienists come in. I think I would suggest, and a lot of people would recognise the fact that there's been an imbalance in a lot of industries and a lot of businesses in the way that occupational health is managed. There seems to be a larger focus on the well-being side of things and on the clinical side of occupational health, and maybe in some industries a bit of a lesser focus on actual prevention, on occupational hygiene. And what we're trying to do with this idea of sustainable workplace health is to address that. I said in my last presentation, the face of industry, the face of employment has changed beyond recognition in the last 50 years. And our profession has changed very significantly over the last 50 years. We understand a lot more clearly now the links between exposure and disease, and we're better at treating people and keeping them alive. But we should recognise that really we shouldn't be making people ill in the first place. We should be preventing the exposures that cause the harm. Civil courts are more flexible in establishing the links between exposure and ill health, and we've seen a lot of compensation claims, certainly in the asbestos arena, in things like noise, but they are going on in other areas too, and will get greater as the years roll by. So we're at a point now where we would call it a crisis point. I mean, they're the words that we're using. So yeah, as you can see on the slide, we believe that all these workplace illnesses are preventable. Social costs, healthcare costs are increasing. The numbers of people being made ill by work are not going down. That's a critical point to be made here. We might be better at treating them, but we still have a fairly flat line in terms of the numbers that are being made ill as a result of workplace exposures. Litigation costs are increasing for business, and the benefits bill is going up and up and up. And occupational hygiene can do a lot to improve this situation. We've pulled out an example based around COPD, but we could have pulled out an example based on any number of different diseases and illnesses. But as you can see from the slide, HSE will say we've got 135,000 people in the country suffering from COPD, which has either been caused or made worse by workplace exposure. It's difficult with COPD to point to a single cause in an individual, but the figure that HSE have come out with is 135,000 work-related cases of COPD. And if you do a few sums, you take a few bits of information, financial information from different sources, that's costing the public purse £1.3 billion a year. That's occupational COPD alone. So when you add in occupational cancer and you add in all the other diseases, asthma, noise-induced hearing loss, hand-on, HAV syndrome, hand-on vibration, and the 1,001 other conditions, the cost to the public purse is very, very significant. I'm not going to try and come up with a number. It's certainly more than 1.3 billion because that's COPD alone. It will be of the order of several billions of pounds a year. All of that is preventable with good workplace health risk management, with good occupational hygiene. And no, we can't stop the cases that are running down the road as a result of historic exposures. Unfortunately, there are still some people going to become ill as a result of exposures that have happened in the past. But certainly we ought to be doing things now to stop this problem just running on into the future unchecked. So we've come up with this idea of sustainable workplace health. You will recognise this model as hygiene practitioners You can see on the slide that this is the kind of the process for managing health risks out there in business. We come in at steps 1 to 3, assessing risk, controlling risk, and then monitoring controls. Excuse me. I would suggest we would suggest, I think, that there's a disproportionate focus on steps 4 and 5 in this process here. Industry, when you talk to stakeholders about occupational health risks, very often they have got very good health surveillance programs in place, and those systems will pick up people that have been made ill, and they will give them access to the very best medical treatment in the world. There's no doubt about that. But where industry is often weaker is these steps higher up the ladder, these prevention steps, which is what occupational hygiene aims to achieve. So even now in 2020-21, we're still left with a situation where hazards are not designed out of the workplace. There are plenty of opportunities to design out risk, not just in construction. We've done a lot of work at health by design in construction. There's been a great deal of work going on in the last 10 years to design out construction risks. But in all industries, there's still the opportunity to design out risks. How often do hygienists get involved at that front end and given the opportunity to while the process is being designed, to remove risks? We're often called in when it becomes apparent that they've left a hazard in the process and they don't really know how to control it. There is a tendency at the moment out there in the world to plump for the cheapest and easiest exposure. If you've got a dust problem, how do you solve it? You solve it with dust masks. Give everybody a mask. You know, that is not the way to control respiratory risk in industry. But we need to bust these myths as a profession. We need to point people in the right direction. As I said earlier, if people are relying on dust masks as their only barrier to protect them, then that is a very, very failure-prone method of controlling health risks. And we see blanket health surveillance in businesses. We see everybody being sheep dipped. Might not be a great term, but I've just used it. So, you know, everybody gets a medical every year. Everybody gets a lung function test. Everybody gets an audiometry test, regardless of what they're actually exposed to in the workplace. It's not risk-based health surveillance. It's just a blanket approach. That is costing industry a lot of money. There's nothing wrong with it. That's fine. If they want to do that, that's fine. It's not harmful. But where it does become harmful is when they're investing in that element of health risk management at the expense of investing in the prevention side. Money could be saved with more focused risk-based health surveillance programs that could be redirected towards preventing harm in the first place. And that's one of the key things that we're trying to push with a sustainable workplace health. This is why it's sustainable, because we're not making people ill any longer. We're not continuing to propagate this spiraling sort of benefits bill and these healthcare costs for individuals that have been harmed. The solutions there, you can see, I mean, they're just basically the opposite to what I put up on the last slide. We need to design out hazards. We need to get occupational hygiene a place at the top table when it comes to health risk management strategy. We can't just be called in when someone found that they've got a problem in the workplace. We need to get ourselves in there at a strategic level, making decisions as to how health risks are going to be managed when processes are being designed. Better focus of risk health surveillance programs would be useful to redirect resources to where we feel that they would be better spent on prevention. And things like tax incentives. So I think we're drawing a parallel here with the environmental situation. You know, 40 years ago, the environmental lobby was struggling to be heard. They have built a very convincing argument around carbon dioxide emissions. It's impossible to deny the facts, although some people try to. But if tax incentives and things like that were able to be provided to people that were managing risk better and not making people ill, because those people are becoming a burden on our healthcare system, that would drive positive change. Just finally on this, I mean, these are what we see as the key facets of sustainable workplace health. I'm not going to read them out. You can read the slide yourself and they'll be available to you afterwards. But this is all about improving control and designing out risk and getting occupational hygiene in at the right time when strategic decisions are being made to allow us to influence how health risks are managed in any particular project. Item E on the slide there, making hygiene and health core to mainstream STEM and health curricula. We don't have a sufficient presence in further and higher education at the moment. There are very few courses that teach occupational hygiene as a subject. There are similarly few courses that even mention occupational hygiene. So when people are working towards engineering degrees, science degrees, there's virtually no exposure to the term occupational hygiene for those the people on those courses, for those students. And we're trying to find our way in at that point so that we're sending them out into the world of work with a knowledge that hygiene exists and hygiene is something that they need to consider in their working lives. I think that's all I've got time to say about sustainable workplace health. I'll move on very, very quickly to my last thing, and there's only one slide here. I mean, it's just about volunteering for BOHS. We do a lot of work. BOHS definitely punches above our weight in terms of the reach that we've got. And as I say, if you looked at Alison's mind map and realised how many collaborations we are involved with, it would be impressive. It would be impressive to anyone. Head office do a fantastic job of managing the business and keeping BOHS running and looking after the website and doing 1,001 other things. But we have always been a members organisation. We have always relied on our membership and volunteers from our membership to deliver the business of BOHS. I'm a volunteer. All the people on the board are volunteers. I'm just really putting out a call to members out there to consider whether or not you volunteering for BOHS is something you think you might want to do. We've had a little bit of a random approach to volunteering in the past, but we've addressed that, and there's going to be some information on the website shortly that describes the vacancies that we've got and what's required to fill those volunteer vacancies, and also vacancies that will be coming up in the future. And it's not just about asking you to give your time to deliver BOHS's business. There are many things that you will get from volunteering, and often we find ourselves in jobs where we're not able to develop some specific competences and some specific capabilities. And volunteering will help members to develop some of these competencies and capabilities that will equip them better in their other professional life, in their day jobs. So if you've never volunteered for BOHS, then have a look at the website when the page goes live, and consider whether or not it's something that would help you in your career. Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch with me, my email address is on the slide there, and if you've got any ideas about the presentation, then you can also get in touch with head office using that marketing@bohs.org address. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent. I back up your call to volunteers. I'm a volunteer, and it's like volunteering for BOHS honestly has totally changed my whole career in the last 7 years of doing this. It's worth every minute, honestly. Just raise your hand, do it. It doesn't just benefit the society, it benefits you in so many ways. So get involved, please. And Rob, you've volunteered yourself, so I will be giving you a call later. Any questions? I know, Rob, you did ask a question. I'm so sorry. Would you be able to rephrase it, or do you even just want to unmute yourself and ask yourself, or up to you?
You mean the 1041 one? Higher, but just not. Well.
Hi, Rob.
Hello, Chris. How are you, mate? You all right?
I'm fine, thank you. Yeah.
Good man. Right. Okay. What I mean is, I work for quite clearly a large construction company, and these people that work at the strategic level don't understand what goes on the ground. So we have to work with our own direct employees and then the supply chain, and the supply chain don't always do what we want them to do. So it's always the case. You go down on site and stuff, and they're painting and cutting concrete and all the rest of it and stuff with dodgy kit. So I don't really know what the society expects us to do, or the HSE expects us to do, indeed. If you get my drift.
I get your drift, Rob. Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy thing to tackle. One of the things that hygienists can do very, very well is build a bridge between the workplace and management in a company. So, you know, you'll be familiar with a situation where the management think one thing happens and what actually happens at the sharp end is very different. And hygienists are very good at building that bridge, shining a light on some of the issues. It's not an easy problem to solve. Construction is moving in the right direction. You know, there's no doubt that the industry is better now than it was 10 years ago, and it will be better again in another 10 years' time. It will take that kind of time. The fact that you're in there working as a hygienist in that industry is part of driving that change. You wouldn't have been there 10 years ago because they wouldn't have had a clue that they needed occupational hygiene on that project at all. You're in there now and you are driving positive change, and all we can do is continue with that direction of travel.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent, thanks guys. And just in response to Jennifer, there are the opportunities to volunteer on the BOHS website. I am very slow with these things. I was just trying to find you a link and I can't for the life of me find
I don't think the volunteering page is there yet, Mary. I'm assured it will be there before Christmas, I was told, and I think they meant this Christmas.
Oh, okay, there is a page for the regional coordinator role for the Northeast. I just found that, sorry, I've lost it again. So I think there are one or two kind of dotted on here, so I'll just give me a minute and I'll put some links in there. But yeah, but an actual volunteer page is up and coming then. Okay, cool. Thanks. So thank you so much, Chris. Absolutely fantastic. Covered a lot there. Great. And we're gonna go straight into Graham now. We're gonna get all knee deep in isocyanates next. Thank you, Graham. Excellent. So just to set up who Graham is. So Graham Newport, he's a certified occupational hygienist with over 30 years of experience working in specialty chemicals, plastics, and pharmaceutical industry. He also holds a PhD in chemistry. He is currently the BOHS responsible officer, acting as the interface between BOHS and the Home Office with respect to the GLA, the Group Authority license. And his presentation will be talking all about this. So take it away, Graham.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my PowerPoint presentation to come up.
I can see it. If you press the presentation button at the very bottom, you know, oh, do you see like a little, kind of like a little book icon at the bottom right here? It's just to the right of there. So if you go a bit lower, where it says notes, comments, the very, very, very bottom bar here.
I'm actually seeing nothing at the moment.
Oh.
All right, are you okay now? Can you see that?
We can see the slide, but it's not in like presentation mode, so we can see the list of your other slides to the left. You know, it's okay. It doesn't matter a whole great deal. We can see the slides, so it's fine.
If you're okay to see the slides, we'll run with that. So my apologies for that. Yeah,
it's fine.
As Mary said, what I'm going to be concentrating on, we're moving on to the isocyanate section of the presentation. I'm going to be focusing on the group authority license, which throughout this presentation we're going to refer to as the GAL. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to give you a bit of background as to why we actually need the GAL, an overview of what we require from members. Most of you will be familiar with the SOP. So what I'll be doing, we've actually tweaked the SOP to make the reporting requirements a little bit less onerous. So what I'll be doing as I go into the presentation, I'll be pointing out those changes. So why do we need the group authority license? Well, HSE recommend MDHS 25/4 for the measurement of isocyanates. That is the only method that they recommend. Many laboratories offer other techniques, but they do not allow the data from those techniques to be compared directly to the WELs. So MDHS 25/4 is the one that should be used for isocyanates. The problem with that method is it uses 1,2-methoxyphenol piperazine, which is a substance which is a controlled drug. Like all controlled drugs, that means that if you supply or use 1,2-MP, you need to do so under a Home Office license. When the Home Office issue those licenses, they're subject to a series of conditions. If you don't comply with those conditions, the Home Office have the power to revoke the license. So this puts members of the FOH who operate under the GAL, it puts them in a privileged position because they can work to MDHS 25.4 without having to apply for their own individual license. That opportunity is given to various grades of membership. So the grades that qualify to be able to work under the GAL is the Chartered Fellow, the Chartered Members, Licentiates and Associates. That doesn't mean that ordinary members and others can't assist in surveys. They can, but if they do so, they've got to work under the close supervision of members and also understand the requirements of the SOP. This is a key benefit to members. It's absolutely essential that we retain that license. If we were to lose it, fewer surveys would be carried out, and the net result would be that workers' health would be compromised. So it's essential that that license is retained. To assist us to do that, we've prepared the SOP, which it ensures a controlled chain of custody from when you receive these supplies to when they're returned back to the lab. All of the key requirements, all of the conditions of the Home Office license are embodied into that SOP. So the logic's very simple. Comply with the SOP, you comply with the conditions in the Home Office license, and we retain it for future use. The current version of the Group Authority License SOP is version 4. I've just given the cover there. This is downloadable from the BOHS website. One thing to be clear about, following the SOP does not ensure that you're generating valid isocyanate data. That's the job of MDHS 25.4. The SOP looks at the compliance with the Home Office license conditions. So members need to apply with both. To make certain that we're complying with the SOP, it's important that we carry out the GAL audit, which, as you know, is carried out at the end of each year. Just to give a quick introduction to the GAL audit team, many of you that are members already know Claire Creed and Val Pollard. These are people that are essential to make the GAL work. Laboratories will often make inquiries to BOHS when they have a request for supplies to ensure that the people requesting those supplies are appropriate grade of membership. So Claire and Val are very much involved with those checks, as well as all the administration at the end of the year that goes on with carrying out the audit itself. We have the Faculty of Occupational Hygiene Committee who oversee the whole process, and they will also approve the finalised audit report. And then to myself at the bottom, it's my finger that goes on the send button that will put that audit report into the hands of the Home Office. Just my request, please take care to provide accurate, honest responses. Ensure that when you send in audit returns, if you're selected, you complete all the sections. If there's any sections not completed, then Val or Claire will return them so that they are completed before they move on to the next stage. This adds to the workload and slows down the whole process. So please complete all sections. It's not just the SOP people need to comply with, as with all other pieces of work carried out by members, just a reminder that you will also need to comply with the FOH Code of Ethics and meet the requirements of the CPD scheme. Looking at the timetable for this year, we require that all members make their declaration as to whether they've used 1,2-MP throughout the year, or whether they intend to. It's whether you've either used it or you intend to use it in this calendar year. The deadline for making that declaration is the 1st of December. Just be aware that when you're asked if you've used 12MP, it refers to you as an individual member. If you work for a company that carries out these surveys, but you personally haven't taken part in those surveys, then you should be responding no. For those people that have used those suppliers, by the 5th of December, you'll receive an email to say whether if you have been selected for audit. We require those audit forms to be completed and returned by the absolute deadline of the 10th of January. That's really quite late. We've got to prepare our final report by the end of January. So if you can send in returns well before the 10th of January deadline, that would be very much appreciated. One of the things that the Home Office require us to do is they want to know how much 12MP has been used by members in the calendar year. That's actually not a very easy question to answer. One thing that we've tried to do this time is to engage the help of the people that really do know what's being supplied. The laboratories know exactly how much has been supplied to each of the members. And what we've endeavoured to do is to get their assistance so we get in accurate data. One of the complications of doing that, this is shared data, so we do have an issue in terms of getting members' permission to share that data. So it is now a condition of use of the GAL that if you use that, you grant permission for the laboratories to share data with us so that we can see how much 12MP has been sent out and returned. We'll be able to use those data to verify submissions by members on their audit returns. Please be aware that we will look at any discrepancies. For example, if the laboratory has supplied you with 12MP back in January and you haven't declared usage, then we'll be asking the question as to why that hasn't been declared. I put this slide in because one of the questions I'm very regularly asked is we want to do occupational hygiene surveys. We want to test for isocyanates in Northern Ireland. Can we use the GAL to work there? The simple answer to that is no, you can't. The GAL only works, is only applicable for use within Great Britain, so that's England, Scotland and Wales. If you're selected for audit, we ask you to complete 3 types of forms. There's a local standard operating procedure. There's the individual work record sheet, where need be with exception records where something has gone wrong, and the audit of records cover sheet. The local standard operating procedure really just summarises how you maintain the chain of custody at your company. In general, you will only need to submit a single local SOP for each member company. I don't expect you to read the small print on this. This is just to remind you that these forms are all downloadable from the BOHS website. All of these forms are kept as simple as we can make them, and they constitute just a single side of A4. The local standard operating procedure, for example, will look at what systems do you have for ordering, which laboratories do you use, what's your system for taking to site, keeping your samples secure, how do you return them to the labs. These are the types of tick box answers that we expect to see on the local SOP. I mentioned there authorised laboratories. There are only 3 laboratories that are authorised to provide you with suppliers. There's the Health and Safety Laboratory, HSL, there's RPS Labs, and there's the Institute of Occupational Medicine. The other form that we need you to complete, or one of the other forms, is the individual work record sheet. This needs to be completed for each and every survey. I had the comment last time, can we just submit a single one that's representative of all of our surveys? And the answer is no, we need one of these completed for each and every survey. Bear in mind, this relates again to you as an individual member. We don't need you to complete surveys for every survey carried out at the company, just the ones that you as an individual have taken part in. This is the individual record sheet. Again, I'm not going to go into detail there, but it's the sort of thing that you'd expect. Who took part in the survey, which laboratory was involved, how many filters did you order, how many did you send back, and a key entry at the bottom there is a tracking reference. So I want to make a specific reference there because it wasn't done that well at the last audit. It's essential that you maintain a secure tracking system for making certain that when you return samples to the lab, they are tracked. And we require you to include the tracking number as part of that individual work record sheet. Version 3 of the SOP, the one that was used last time, it required tracking numbers for samples that you'd received from the laboratory. Many members were saying they actually found that difficult to obtain in many cases, and it doesn't add too much to the picture. So version 4 does not require tracking numbers for samples that you receive from the laboratory, but it's essential that you include the tracking numbers when you send the sample back. Exception records are going to be required where something goes wrong, something's a bit unusual happening, and I've given some examples here. If you use an unlisted laboratory that's not permitted, we want an explanation for that on an exception record. If there's a discrepancy between the amount of 1,2-MP ordered and that returned to the laboratory, again, we need an explanation. For example, if you ordered 10 impregnated filters and you only returned 6 to the laboratory, we're going to ask the question, what happened to the other 4? Last year, we had people saying that one of the reasons that there was a discrepancy is that they retained some of those media for a future survey. Please be aware that's not permitted. The SOP does not allow you to put unused media into stock. They need to be returned to the issuing laboratory for destruction. Version 3 required that if you did return unused samples to the lab, you needed to fill in an exception record to explain that they were being returned for destruction. We don't really see that now as an exception. It's quite standard practice for you to order a few more than you need and just return them to the lab for destruction. That's a common practice. If you do that, you no longer required to fill in an exception record if you include unused media back to the lab with exposed samples. If your entire batch were returned for destruction, then that is more unusual, and we would require an exception record where you're returning the entire batch. If you have theft of samples, they need to be reported to the police and also a report to BOHS together with a written report. This is, again, just an indication of the exception record. It's again one side of A4, where there's a tick box describing which of those circumstances apply. I'll go quickly through these. The auditor record cover sheet is really nothing more than an index. It will list the other records that you're returning as part of the audit. And that's, again, is something that is downloadable from the website. Where you complete records, they have to be retained for 5 years past the entry date. The latest version of the SOP does include an additional record that wasn't there before. This is an audit non-conformance record. This is a record that will be sent to members if we discover a non-conformance. So hopefully this is the closest you ever get to one of these. Essentially, what we'll be doing is just pointing out what the requirement of the SOP was, why you didn't comply with it, and we will be asking members to reply within 10 working days from receiving the record, and just to point out any remedial action that's been taken in the short term or in the longer term to prevent reoccurrence. That's quickly gone through that. That's showing you the position that we're in at the moment. And I think you can see from the comments that I've made there, the majority of the issues arose because members weren't totally familiar with the SOP. I think as hygienists, if we go on site to carry out a survey, what's quite common these days is you'll be given a set of rules by contractors together with a simple test that you complete to show that you've understood those rules for contractors. When you do that, you want to get on site and start carrying out your survey as quickly as you can. So when you read through the contractor's rules, you give it more focus, you pay concentration to what you're reading on the basis that you very quickly want to be able to fill in this questionnaire and actually get on with the work that you're there to do. We've used that same principle to try and improve members' understanding and appreciation of the key points of the SOP. So one of the big changes that we're going to see is from the 1st of January next year, all those working under the GAL will be required to pass a GAL assessment. This GAL assessment is 14 multiple choice questions. Each question is given 4 possible answers, only one of which is correct. We will require people to pass all 14, to answer all 14 questions correctly in order to pass the GAL. This is no more onerous than a typical on-site induction. I anticipate that this is going to take at the very long, it's about 10 minutes. I believe that somebody sitting down with a cup of coffee and a copy of the GAL will complete this GAL assessment before the coffee. This we expect to be available to be able to take online from November in readiness for 2022. If you have any questions or queries on anything associated with the GAL, you can get in touch with me at the email address that you see there. Has anybody got any? That ends the presentation. If anybody's got any questions or queries arising from what you've heard so far, I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you very much, Graham. That was excellent, very thorough. I haven't seen any questions come in yet, but I'll give you guys a minute just to pop one through. Can I ask a question though? So the assessment that we need to complete, let's say next year I didn't have any isocyanate jobs coming up until March or April. So would it be okay to complete the assessment just before I do that first job of the year, or do I still need to complete that test before the end of this year, or how does it work?
Yeah. Absolutely. What we require is that people complete this GAL assessment in order to be able to use the license. So actually, we really want people to have done this before they order their media supplies. If they're not going to carry out a survey until July, then really they can complete this any time before the end of June. So the requirement is prior to actually working under the GAL license. So although we've said it's from the 1st of January, if you're going to carry out a survey on the 2nd of January, then you would need to be doing it this year. Otherwise, you have a time period into next year before you're required to complete it.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Oh, here we go. Okay. Oh, you know what? This might be a question for Paul. Asking about other monitoring methods and development. You're in the Republic of Ireland and can't get the media. And I've heard that dry sampling is being used. You know what? From there, because we had another method-related question, I might just shoot right into Paul if that's okay, because he'll probably answer all of this. So, are you okay with that, Graham? Or does anybody else want to ask one more question to Graham about
Yeah,
the GLA?
I think we're all going to be interested in what Paul's going to say to see what the other options are available to us. So yeah, I think Paul will be better placed to answer that with the work that he's been doing there.
Oh, okay, come on then, Paul. No pressure or anything. Everybody's very eager to hear what you have to say.
Right, always nice to have a low-key start to a presentation. Yeah. Yeah, obviously. All right, I'll share my screen.
I'll just do your really quick intro. I'm sure we all know who Paul is, but Paul, he's an analytical chemist in the analytical chemistry team. He has over 25 years experience in analytical and sample preparation techniques, method development and research, and he specializes in the analysis of pesticides, biocides, and reactive chemicals such as isocyanates in a variety of matrices. So perfect. Okay, take it away, Paul.
Okay, I'm trying to get my slideshow to start here. There we go. Right. Okay, everybody. Right, I was hoping I'd just be the tail end of a more interesting subject, but here we go. Right, my name is Paul Johnson. I have worked for quite a while in isocyanate field, but recently I've been working more with pesticides and biocides type things. So apologies if I am a little bit rusty at this. The way things are going, I will be back focusing on isocyanates. So maybe one for the future. Right, here we go. So what I want to talk about first of all is, now I appreciate most of you listening do know what an isocyanate is and what the issues we have surrounding it. Obviously, these are of a concern to a lot of you. But what I will still do is, for those that maybe don't know so much about isocyanates, is I'm going to give an introduction. Go make a cup of tea if you do know it all, but I think it's quite important to make sure we understand where we are. I can then go on to what interests you perhaps a bit more, which is the air monitoring side of things and what HSC is looking at in terms of this. So now I must say, as I said, I've been away from the isocyanate work for a little while now. And the technical work and the research work looking at alternative methods has been completed by a colleague of mine, Glenn McConaughey, who some of you may have worked with, who is a very, very competent scientist, but unfortunately is not available to give this presentation. So you get the runner-up, I'm afraid. Okay, so yeah, I'll do a quick run through of what isocyanates are, what we use them for, why they are a problem, and then I hopefully go into something that'll give you a little bit more about what we've been thinking about. So an isocyanate obviously can refer to the functional group, and that's generally as scientists how we think of it. So it's the NCO group at the top of that slide. But organic compounds that contain this are also referred to as isocyanates. And obviously here, the more common ones we come across are the diisocyanates containing two of these groups. And here is one that you're probably all familiar with, which is MDI. Okay. So what do we use isocyanates for? A lot, really. They're used in manufacture of many products, such as flexible and rigid polymers, polyurethane foams, polyurethane rubbers and elastomers, and are found as cross-linking agents in specialist surface coatings. So you find them on your car, you find them everywhere, really. Inks, adhesives, and binders for foundry coatings, which is something, casting sands, which is something I will comment on a bit later as one of the issues with isocyanates and the analysis. So they're used in a great variety of industries. The monoisocyanates, such as methyl isocyanate, are used in the manufacture of pesticides, and unfortunately, they have the toxic effect of this compound was all too apparent in the 1984 Bhopal disaster. So you can see they are not particularly pleasant chemicals just from that. What makes them so useful is they are electrophiles, and as such, they react towards a variety of nucleophiles, including alcohols, so to produce a polyurethane linkage. They work out with amines to produce polyurea linkages and the water to produce amines and carbon dioxide, and they can go on to react with the amine they've just produced from themselves and produce blown foams, etc., etc. Right. Now, why are they of concern? Well, first of all, they're not going away anytime soon. As you can see, they are way too useful, but they are problematic. They are irritants and potent sensitizers. They are one of the most commonly identified causes of occupational asthma in most industrial countries. And for this reason, HSE has set up an exposure limit in EH40 and a recommended method for sample and analysis, which is MDHS 25.4, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Okay. The workplace exposure limit is 0.02 milligrams per meter cubed for the long-term exposure and 0.07 milligrams per meter cubed for the short-term exposure. And the key here is that, as the well states, it's isocyanates all as NCO except for methyl isocyanate. Now, methyl isocyanate has its own limit, but the key here is as NCO. So it doesn't matter which compound you're looking for. It's the functional group on it that is what we need to measure. So for compliance with the well, all isocyanate groups need to be measured regardless of whether they are on the simplest monomer or the most complex polymer. It does make no difference. Isocyanates come in a variety of forms. There was a time when isocyanate analysis generally involved a relatively small number of formulas containing very well characterized diisocyanate monomers and a few oligomers, such as 3, 4, 5, 6 membered MDI rings. But the picture is getting more and more complicated. So what we would typically look at before was perhaps the aliphatics versus the aromatics with a few little oligomers thrown in. Here's MDI, three isomers and a polymeric version. So those are the multiple ring versions. Here's HDI, and HDI comes as several oligomers commonly. So you've got uretidone, you've got biuret, you've got isocyanurate, you've got diisocyanurate, very common. To make matters worse, we have now got increasingly more complex structures as the technology increases, and people are looking for better solutions and more tailored solutions for their isocyanate usage. Again, as I said, it doesn't really matter what it's on. It's still the NCO group that we are interested in. This just makes our life harder. Okay, and add to that, we've got now prepolymers and blocked isocyanates. And although blocked isocyanates should have no free isocyanate available, they are often described as having reduced free isocyanate, so it can still be present. And obviously, at some point in the process, you need to remove the blocking agent and produce a free isocyanate. And in the past, we have seen free isocyanates from blocked isocyanates leaking from ovens that are used to do the unblocking. So by no means the perfect solution. Right, here we go. So exposure measurement. Isocyanate sampling analysis can be difficult if it's done properly. By difficult, I mean sampling a complex isocyanate system containing less common or complex diisocyanates, oligomers, and prepolymers. It could be present as aerosols, vapors, or maybe a bit of both. On top of this, isocyanates are only used because they are highly reactive chemicals, so will continue to react in the air and on the sampling media. So maybe throwing some monoisocyanates as the result of thermal degradation, which takes us back to the foundry work. And you have an additional free isocyanates that you were not aware were even present, but you still need to analyze them to achieve a trig, or total reactive isocyanate group analysis. Now, there are direct measurement instruments, and these have the advantage of being direct reading. You get what is there at the time. They are generally only applicable for the determination of specific diisocyanate monomers and not mixtures of polymers, and they generally cannot be used for monitoring aerosols, and a lot of applications such as car spraying, etc., use aerosols. Most indirect methods for measuring airborne isocyanates involve pumping a volume of air through an impinger or a filter containing a derivatizing reagent, and then quantifying the amount of isocyanate using high-performance liquid chromatogram, nice bit of kit on the right there, with a specific detector or combination of detectors. The method has to determine trig. Not just contributions from specific monomers or polymers. I will keep repeating this because it is the most important thing going forward as well for compliance. This is a requirement under UK law. For the derivatizing reagent has to react rapidly with all isocyanate species and form a stable derivative that we can then take back to the lab for analysis. The sampling method has to catch total airborne isocyanate, taking into account its physical nature, i.e. vapor and aerosol. On top of this, we have safety considerations for personal sampling. Methods using impingers have risk from both glass breaking and from solvent spillage. And this is not going to be easy for someone moving while they are at work and should be avoided. And indeed, our hygienists at HSE have long since been against and refused to use glass impingers of this nature for personal sampling. Okay. Right, the legislative restrictions for materials used. Yeah, hang about, sorry, missed a line there. So there is a legislative restrictions for some of the materials used. This is to do with the piperazines used as derivatizing agent. And that's been covered by Graham for MDHS 25, so I'll not go anywhere near the GAL and SOP. I think Graham covered that very, very well. So the choice of sampler depends on some extent to the physical state of what you're measuring. The International Isocyanate Institute found that filters are unsuitable for large particles, so impingers are required for sampling aerosols. They do not effectively sample small particles, sort of less than 1 micron. So in true Jack Sprat fashion, an inline combination impinger followed by a filter is required. Okay. In the UK, MDHS 25.4 is the only method recommended by HSE for compliance monitoring, i.e. trig measurement. It is capable of sampling vapors and aerosols and measuring a wide range of isocyanate monomer polymers and prepolymer chemistries. It uses a ratio of detector responses from the monomer to identify and quantify the corresponding oligomeric and polymeric isocyanates. So you don't need to get standards for every single compound you're looking at, because that would be an absolute nightmare. Something again that comes into play a little bit further down the line. The main problem with MDHS 25 is 1,2-MP and the legislation surrounding it, and is very unlikely to be lifted. So alternatives needed to be looked at. And I guess this is where most of the questions are going to come out. What alternatives are there? So we have looked at alternative standard methods, i.e. ISO methods, and a few others. I say we. And we have looked at them all. We've done some work with them. Some of them we can very much dismiss out of hand. And there is a paper stroke review that is due to be submitted soon that will summarize our thoughts and decisions on what the positive and negatives of all these methods are. So I won't bore you with lots of detail about them. If you're that interested, you can go and read this when it eventually appears. We're just finishing it off now. But we looked at whether we could develop these methods into methods that can be used in place of MDHS 25. And solve the piperazine issue. But briefly, some of these methods do use piperazine. I've highlighted them. So you've got 17735, which uses MAP, which is piperazine. You've got the method down the bottom. It's two problems with that. It's only monitoring TDI and it contains piperazine. Another method, ISO 17736 is a trig method and was a possible alternative. It uses a blank PTF filter ahead of a MAMA impregnated filter, but it then desorbs into 1,2-MP. There's a possibility of using an alternative derivative there, so that's not off the list. But the underivatized isocyanate sitting on the first filter potentially will react with alcohols, amines, and water to give an underestimation of exposure before we can get it back to the lab. And of course, it currently does use 1,2-MP. So from this list, other than ISO 16702, which is MDHS25 in another form, we have ISO 17734, which uses impingers, which we don't like, but it does not have piperazine. It has dibutylamine, and we'll come back to him in a bit. Okay, another alternative method that we have looked at is the DAN method, as we call it. It's a novel method that was being developed by NIOSH. It does use an impinger, but there are other researchers, particularly in Canada, who are looking at alternative samplers. With this, air is drawn through the sampler train consisting of an impinger containing a solution of 1,8-diamino, I'm reading this, diamino naphthalene, which is DAN, and it's followed by a backup filter treated with the same compound. Its advantage is that all isocyanate functional groups react with one of the secondary amine groups on the DAN to form a urea. During subsequent laboratory workup, it yields one molecule of pyrimidone for each isocyanate group. So no matter what the compound is, all isocyanate groups produce the same analyte. Pyrimidone is then quantified by LC-MS and reported as isocyanate concentration. And this is one we haven't given up on. So it may be one for the future, but at HSC we have struggled to make it into a practical method that can be easily used by contract lab, and that is our aim. We don't want to basically have every single isocyanate sample have to come to us. We want it to be a simple method that can be distributed and easily used. So that is one method we are still working on. Okay. Now ISO 17734. Now this method includes an option for a dry denuder in place of the impinger. And as I'm sure you are all aware, this has been commercialized as the Asset EZ4 NCO dry sampler, and it is easily available. It doesn't use an impinger or a solvent, so it appears safer. It uses dibutylamine as a derivative, so no issue with piperazine. It samples for aerosol and vapor, and has a minimal setup and no field extraction. So perfect, essentially, except it isn't. Oh, and it has a an isocyanate, an ICA low molecular weight sampler as well. So this is something that MDHS25 struggles with. So we do like that, and we do actually use it for particular targeted analysis. All right, where are we? Right, I think I'm missing some slides here. Okay, I'm going to have to continue without slides for some reason. I don't know where they've gone. Let me just see if they are there. No, they're not. Okay, right, ignoring that. So back in the laboratory, the sample preparation is quite involved. For the asset sampler, it requires analysis by HPLC MS, which is not a trig method. You do need to You need to know which compounds you're looking for, and you need standards for each of those compounds using that analytical method. So it is not a trig method. It is not suitable for determining compliance with the well. That is the situation it is in at the moment. It is a very good sampler. If you're targeting particular isocyanates, it's a very good sampler. If you're not trying to, if it's for non-compliance work, but for compliance work for compliance with the well, it's not the method to be used at present. So all isocyanate species have to be known and calibrated standards have to be available. A number of calibration standards are available commercially, but these are generally the more common ones. And if you can show that your sample only contains those and nothing else, then it's a possibility you could get away with this, but in order for it to be truly trig, this doesn't do the job. It has been shown to use to measure trig, but using an archaic instrument that nearly no lab in the country would have. The people who developed this were based in Sweden in a university. They had one. We've looked at purchasing one. You can't really get them anymore. And then they'd have to be rolled out to every contract lab as well, so it wouldn't work. HSC are looking at ways, and this is where we're currently focused at using this sampler, looking ways to make this into a trig method, but at present an arduous process that is not suitable for routine analysis. We hope to get there, and that's pretty much where we are with that. So I know everyone's looking at this as the answer to MDHS 25, but it's not, unfortunately. So the only recommended methods remains MDHS 25. Right, where are we? I think there's this one. I asked Glenn for a few things that he considered important to have mentioned in this presentation. And these are what he came up with. He said, make sure you are following the requirements of the SOP and the GAL. As a laboratory that provides MDHS filters, impregnated filters for MDHS 25, this is very important to us. How much information you can get from things like the safety data sheet is something to consider. It may contain information that would help the analyst identify the isocyanates present, but it can be difficult to interpret. Mixtures of isocyanates and various compositions can be listed under the same CAS number. Polymeric MDI is a case in point. It's essentially one CAS number for a mixture of monomer and various oligomers, but you don't know the composition of the oligomer makeup. Sampling and characterizing the bulk sample is important if an accurate measurement of the trig is to be achieved. Glenn spends a lot of time working on this as samples come in. It's not the easiest thing to do, and it's something, again, we're looking at simplifying as much as possible. So the total free isocyanate concentration can be determined by titration, and this can be compared to characterization using instrumentation, and that is how Glenn determines that he has captured every single isocyanate in a sample. Finally, under European Union regulation REACH, trig analysis will be required. I know we're not in the EU anymore, but we're not far away, and I believe our REACH system is pretty much in line with 1% additional training will be required. So that's another thought that comes into play. It's just something Glenn wanted mentioned. Okay. Now, Kate has given me a few slides on biomonitoring research. I could go through them, but if Kate is out there, it might be easier if she does, and I'll just ping through the slides. Are you there, Kate?
I am.
Are you all right to go through these?
Sure.
Right.
Okay, so as well as looking at the air monitoring difficulties, we are currently doing some research on biological monitoring side. Many of you will be aware that we have an existing method looking at the diamines in urine for diisocyanates, and there's actually a value for those isocyanates. So at the moment we're looking at two particular questions. One is, can other isocyanates be measured using the amines in urine approach? And the other is, can we find a more specific biomarker for diisocyanates? Because currently we are measuring the corresponding diamine in urine, and as many of you all know, these are actually widespread industrial chemicals in their own right. Next slide. So one of the alternative isocyanates that we have looked at is something that I will call TIPTP. It's part of a theme in isocyanate development that manufacturers are going to larger, more complicated and less volatile isocyanates, with the view that they are safer because of they're less volatile, so they're less likely to get airborne, and also that they apparently won't be able to be inhaled as effectively because they are larger. I'm not sure that there's actually any data to show that they can't be inhaled, so that's an issue. So we just wanted to look at this one, which appeared in a product that we were doing a site visit for, to see whether the principle applies that all NCO isocyanates will convert to amine.
Can I cut in real quick? I'm so sorry. We're having a little bit of trouble with the sound.
Yeah, I've just realised I haven't got my twiddle around. Sorry.
That's okay. Maybe if
I was busy listening for 45 minutes, not talking.
Oh no. Paul, maybe if you mute yourself as well, and then hopefully if it's just Kate's audio on, that should help. So let's try that and see how it works.
I do apologise for that. Anyway, so TIPTB is a larger and less volatile isocyanate, and it's marketed as potentially more safer. And is that actually true? So we have looked at this to see whether it forms the corresponding triamine, and we've also measured this on a site visit where we have shown that we. Ooh, I don't want to go on a slide. We have shown that where we've found this isocyanate in air samples, then we can find it in the workers who that air sample corresponded to. The current data set is very small, but it does show that despite it being less volatile, it is airborne in certain processes, and it can actually appear in urine, so therefore there is exposure going on. It's our opinion that all NCO groups can cause sensitization or irritation, and so therefore they should be controlled. Next slide. The other thing we're looking at is a thing called the Lysine Conjugate of Mdi. As I've already said, the diisocyanates we measure as diamines in urine, but those diamines could come from the diamines themselves in industrial settings. As we all know, diisocyanates react readily with protein groups, which is how they are aspargens, and it has been reported in the literature that MDI reacts with lysine to form MDI lysine and acetyl MDI lysine, and this has been demonstrated in plasma samples of exposed workers. We would prefer to work in urine samples, of course, so we've been looking to see whether we can find these compounds in urine samples of exposed workers. We have detected acetyl MDI lysine in worker samples, and there is a correlation, it appears, with urinary MDA when they are only exposed to MDI. So we are hopeful that this is an approach that we could be using. It's unlikely to replace the amine method as a routine method, but it would be potentially useful in cases where you have either mixed exposures or some uncertainty as to whether they're exposed to the isocyanate or the amine. An example might be where there's potential hydrolysis in the workplace. And that's all I have.
We're having a couple of problems. For one,
I'm finished.
The screen has come off. Paul, could you try re-presenting it? I'm not sure how that happens.
I can see it.
Okay. Has this happened to anybody else? It's gone small. Oh no. Oh goodness. Okay, maybe it's just me. For some reason, it's not on the screen anymore. If anybody else is struggling as I am. Also, Kate, would you mind maybe pulling out your microphone, putting it back in again? It's just been really quiet, a bit scratchy.
I finished.
Oh, you're done. Okay, never mind. Okay,
So,
on to questions.
That's not bother.
Sorry, we could hear you fine. It was just a bit quiet. So when the recording goes on YouTube, you guys just crank it up a little bit, and it'll be fine. Right. Okay. Any questions? So we've gone over time, but I'm sure if everybody's happy to hang on for 5 more minutes, we can get through whatever questions come through. Oh, here we go. Okay, one for you, Paul. So would you mind just discussing again the uses of the dry sampler and how to get the best out of them? So for example, sending a sample of the material being used to the lab for identification.
Sorry, is that a question regarding the bulk material? Is it? Paul discussed again the uses of dry sampler and how to get the best out of the sample.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I mean, the dry sampler, what we do, I say we, again, it's Glenn who has been putting the donkey work into this. He gets a sample of the bulk, he characterizes it, essentially using MDHS 25. There is part of MDHS 25 that focuses on using bulk. He compares that to titration results, so he'll get, say, 20% free isocyanate as a result. He will make sure his analysis matches that, so it's quite intensive. But what he will do is he will identify every isocyanate present as that, and he will use the comparison to make sure he has both. He has captured everything. He can then start to look at. He'll make his own standards, and he can use He can use the asset sampler and calibrations almost made from the bulk. It's a long way off being anything we want to present as a finished article, but it's something Glenn has been working on. The ultimate goal would be to have that as a very simple procedure that we can use going forward. The project we're working on has about 6 months left to run, I think, and whether we'll get there in that 6 months or not is another question. I hope that answers it.
Sorry, there was Francis Wright here who asked that question. Do you mind if I just come in there again for a minute just to clarify something on that?
Yep, it's fine.
Yeah. No, I was actually referring to, the dry samplers, the photograph of the dry samplers that you had there. I get them sent over to me in Ireland, and they can analyse specifically for particular isocyanates. Is there any benefit in sending some of the material that they're using over to the lab, getting them to confirm, yes, it is just MDI, or, it is the specific target one that we're looking for, so that I know I'm not missing out on anything else? Or do the isocyanates kind of react in the air, change? Like if my safety data sheet says, 90% MDI or whatever percentage MDI, is it okay to assume that, okay, it's just MDI and just get and sample on that dry sampler? Or would it be of benefit to send some of the material to the lab, get them to do some tests on it, on the bulk sample, to confirm that?
It's not really a service we're offering at the moment. We're doing it with a few companies where we're doing site visits and comparing MDHS 25 to the asset sampler. So it's not something we offer at the moment. It is something we could probably do. And if you are finding the same bulk material and the same processes being used repeatedly, it might be worth doing. As a one-off, it'd probably be quite an expensive way to approach it. Yeah, it can be done, but it may not be. We're not quite there yet at the moment, I would say.
Okay. So it sounds like looking at the safety data sheet and identifying what's there, and then just asking the lab to analyze, if they can, what particular isocyanate that that's on the safety data sheet seems like, I wouldn't say adequate, but all I can do for the moment from Ireland anyway when I'm doing air monitoring.
Yeah, I mean, Glenn is very particular. He's very precise. So for him, that is never quite good enough. That's why he's developed it a little bit further. To a large extent, you can capture the majority of things on the from the safety data sheet. It may give you all the information you need. With Glenn, it's looking at things like thermal degradation, so foundry visits. We've had a lot of issues with isocyanates that are present in quite large amounts, but are not listed anywhere. They can't be seen in the bulk. They can't be seen on safety data sheets or any other information sheets. So it's more perhaps that situation where this is a concern, where the process itself is generating unknown isocyanates, and unless the lab is prepared to put in the donkey work, they're not necessarily going to be able to spot them, and it could result in a fairly large underestimation of exposure. So it depends on the process. I mean, we're quite happy to talk to people. So perhaps we could take this, if that is a real issue for you, we can discuss it anytime. It's fine.
Great, thank you. Just as we wrap up, I'm hoping to just get one or two more questions in there. Could all the presenters come back on screen, just in case there's a question for somebody else? Thank you. Yeah, there we go. It's nice to see everybody's face together as well. So, I had one for you, Graham, that I missed earlier. It is from Karen. It's about the GLA assessment available from the 1st of January, but it's online from November. Is the 1st of January option a paper format?
Yeah, let me just clarify what I was saying there. The GAL assessment should be available to take online from November onwards. It's a requirement to have passed the GAL assessment from the 1st of January, but that doesn't trigger in any paper exam. We're expecting all people to be taking the GAL assessment online at a time to suit themselves prior to when they take their first work requiring use of the GAL license. So I think the question was relating to a paper assessment from the 1st of January. That's not what we're saying there. Our expectation is that people will take the GAL assessment online, and it's a requirement to have passed that from the 1st of January prior to actually using the GAL license for doing sampling. Is that clear, Mary?
That makes sense to me. Is that okay, Karen, or anybody else have a question about that? Nothing. Okay. Her confusion is that, oh, sorry, where did it go? November assessment was 2022?
If that said, that actually meant to be November 21, so it's from next month. So my apologies for that. If that said November 22, that is my error, and my apologies.
Okay, that's fine. Also, is this an annual requirement or just a one-off? Oh, sorry, for you, Graham. We were just wondering, as from Darren, will this be an annual requirement or is it just a one-off?
It's just a one-off assessment. Yeah. Well, once you pass that GAL assessment, you are then free to use the GAL for doing your work. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. If nobody else has any other questions, I mean, we've gone well over time already. Oh, we do have somebody's hand raised. If you want to unmute yourself, ask a question directly, feel free. Oh no, was that an accidental hand raise? No, anyways, well, I'll leave it at that then. I won't take everybody's whole afternoon. Oh, here we go. This is probably one for you, Paul. Can you mention what are the pros and cons of direct reading instruments for isocyanates?
The pros are, as I see them, I mean, we don't use them, but essentially things like tape readers, passive badges, etc. I believe they are very good at targets. So if you are in an environment where TDI is used, you can get one that looks for TDI. I believe so they can't be used for trig, so no compliance monitoring, but they can be used as sort of safety monitors, etc. Just monitoring what's going on in the background. I believe, yeah, so if you know what you're using and you want to make sure there's a safe level of it in the atmosphere, I believe that's the case with them. I don't believe they can be used for aerosols, and that's the con, essentially. So no trig, no aerosol, but targeted and good for monitoring in a workplace, is my understanding.
Excellent, thank you. We've had one more come through. What are the issues, I think this is for you, Paul, what are the issues surrounding sampling for isocyanate aerosols using the vapor method? So this is your double treated filter, no impinger. Is it likely to underreport exposure due to the reactivity?
It can do, depending on the concentration. I think we try to limit if it's a heavy exposure situation. So I mean, you're talking about perhaps car spraying. Why you'd be monitoring car spraying? I think that's always been a question with us because it's such a high exposure rate anyway. You know, you're going to destroy the well within no time at all. But I believe that yeah, it can deplete the derivatizing reagent quite quickly, and it can do it locally. So big aerosol droplets hitting, they may settle there, and you won't get all the whole of the droplet derivatized, etc. So yeah, they can lead to in certain environments. So long sampling times, heavy contamination, you can get under reporting. So that's why we prefer an impinger, but we can't put an impinger on a person. So we do have a method around it whereby we have statics with impingers and filters, and we can compare them to the filter only on the worker to see if they are functioning similarly.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, I dare not take us past noon because we are way over time. And so big thank you to all 4 speakers. Excellent, very informative. And if nothing else is coming through in the question box, then we'll leave it at that. And keep your eyes peeled for more webinars. We're trying to keep this up. If anybody has a topic that they want discussed at one of these webinars, email me. I would love to hear your ideas, and I'll do my very best to find a presenter for that topic. So just get in touch with me. And thank you very much, everybody. Thank you again to the presenters, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Bye.